Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the propagandists of the 1950s and 1960s in the Western world who claimed that Western women of that era were the most oppressed women ever in human history. There had never been more oppression of women than that period in history. So let's just have a look at that and examine it and just see if it even holds up to minor scrutiny. Now, the leaders of this propaganda were nearly all Jewish, female, mostly lesbian, but not all, and they were all committed Marxists. Some had even worked for Soviet, that is, the Soviet Union, Communist Soviet Union, had worked for underground propaganda magazines that the Soviets were paying for, to agitate and stir up trouble. They'd worked inside trade unions that had been heavily infiltrated by the Soviet Union and their agents and agitators. So these people were, professional propagandists, and their job was to divide Western society along gender lines. And so they decided that, or were told, I'm not sure there was any original thinking in it, but they went out and tried to spread the message that Western women were incredibly oppressed, more than any women had been in human history. So let's just see how well that stacks up. Now, I guess it depends on how you define oppression, but the oppression that they used was that women didn't have the same choices as men did. And that was the context that oppression was done. So they're already playing that game of equal outcomes. For example, the richest man in America, we're not all as rich as he is. Therefore, we are all oppressed because we are not as rich as the richest man in America. So there you go. That's the definition of oppression. So he's got 100 million, but if you have 99.9 million, you are oppressed because you don't have as much as him. So that's the sort of the way they couch oppression in this equal outcome thing. So they look at, well, these are the things that guy has. And so if we don't all have what he has, then we're all oppressed. But you say, well, wait a minute, that guy had to do a lot of hard work. He had to study hard, do a lot of heavy lifting, take a lot of risks. He's got a massive amount of stress. He's got this, he's got that. So surely if you want to have what he has, you have to do the heavy lifting that he did. Oh, no. We're looking at outcomes here, buddy, not the inputs. Inputs, fuck the inputs. We're just looking at outcomes. And the outcomes are not equal, which means it's fucking oppression. So that was the sort of the card that they played. Now, they found a lot of publishing houses to publish the books, and a lot of journalists in the sort of literary trade, if you like, were fairly keen to push and promote these. Also, and a lot of the trade unions, again, that were controlled by the Soviet agitators and agents and stirrers, they were buying large numbers of these books, then distributing it for free amongst libraries and wherever they could, schools and colleges, universities, and so on. So, which are always fertile ground for that sort of nonsense. But and were back then, as maybe a bit more so now, but certainly back then as well. So what they're asking us to believe is that when the most pampered, richest, leisure time rich women in human history. So let me repeat that: the richest, most pampered, most leisure time rich women in human history were really the most oppressed in human history. That's the sort of thing that they're trying to push on us. So because of say kitchen appliances, electronic appliances ranging from refrigerators to washing machines to mixers, the arrival of sliced bread in supermarkets, the proliferation of supermarkets and grocery stores, the expansion of not only public transport but highways, the fact that families could, so just a guy working in a factory could afford a house, a car, could afford for his wife to not have to go to work unless she wanted to, and could still afford 2.4 kids and that sort of thing, just on a factory worker's wage. That's how rich. That's how incredibly rich the purchasing power of the paycheck. That's how incredibly rich the West was. I mean, to varying degrees. The Americans were richer than the British or something. But in that the rich, richer than they'd ever been. Certainly in terms of consumer goods and purchasing power. So now I remember the days of my grandmother, who we used to bake bread every day. I mean, that was a job that went for a couple of hours, and that's before she got to anything else. And so I remember the time that they spent, and there was just the sort of kitchen appliances that were taken for granted, in the 60s and 70s, 80s, that sort of thing didn't really exist back then, or they were quite expensive relative to sort of the average wage. But the difference in, say, my mother's time in the kitchen as versus my grandmother's was just universes apart. If my mother wanted to buy bread, then she went down to the store and got sliced bread at the supermarket. She didn't have to stand there for hours and bake it. If she wanted to, wash the clothes, and there's a washing machine to do it, not the hand washing that had been around sort of previously, or just the rotating tub thing, which just sort of did a basic job. In terms of like kids' diapers, then they went to the special services where they collected the diapers and exchanged them for clean ones, and all that sort of thing. So the amount of services, facilities, the amount of kitchen equipment, and the access to consumer goods all around radically changed lives in that post-World War II period, particularly sort of the early to mid 1950s onwards. So whereas a woman would need to spend 6 hours a day in the kitchen, for example, that time would have been cut, a third of the time. 6 hours became 2 hours, and much easier work, not as heavy work, like something like kneading dough to prepare it to bake bread. That's actually quite hard work. So the hard work was gone as well, that the heavier lifting was gone. So because of these consumer goods, and because of the wealth and purchasing power of the paycheck, people on ordinary jobs could live lives that were unimaginable 100 years previously, or even 50 years previously. So this was a radically different era. So in that era, women not having to go to work, having an annual vacation, a driving vacation, these sorts of things, being able to spend all day talking to your neighbours, or going down and playing tennis at the club, or these having leisure time like this, or if you wanted to, you could do a part-time job or something like that. Then which many women did, by the way. Then that was something that these propagandists claimed to be the most oppressive time in human history for women, purely on the basis they weren't making as much as men and didn't have the same career choices as men did. Purely on that basis, they were therefore the most oppressed. Now that's a arrant nonsense and a manifest absurdity. And women had never had it so good, as indeed men had never had it so good. Almost guaranteed lifetime employment, the ability to look after and care for a dependent wife and children, and still have the house, the car, the annual vacation, this sort of thing. In America, taking the car down along Route 66 and so on. It was almost a culturally iconic time. So the claim that it was oppressive is just bullshit, no matter how you look at it. Coming back now to the issue of choice. Now, there are a couple of things that were baked into this. Firstly, it was communist agitation. They wanted to make out that the West social sort of structure was decadent and broken and that sort of thing. Women in the way the Soviet system works is everyone consumes, everyone works. That's sort of how it works, because that's how it functions. Because once you work, you're then contributing something to all the other citizens. When you consume, you're also contributing something, and so the idea of everyone contributes, everyone benefits was there. But so women had to work. Now, women in the Soviet Union would have killed to go to the West, because you got to work on a dirt floor factory, which a lot of them were. You might have a concrete run where the lathes or the equipment was mounted, but you'd be on dirt floors and so on. You'd be working long shifts. If you were late for work 3 times in a row, you could be sent to prison. So it's very harsh sort of lifestyle there for many people, many workers, women included. And you're working sort of for nothing, really. The way it was structured, you had to have 2 incomes just to get by. So women and men was kind of forced to work, and so this forced equality was brought on simply because of the way the ideological nature and structure of how communists perceive work and consumerism within a communist economy. So there's no profit signals or market signals or anything like that come back. It's just central planners that decide, okay, that factory needs 10,000 workers and they have to have 5,000 men, 5,000 women. That's the ideological determination. That's what you have to do. So factory managers were being heavied and goon squatted into hiring, just increasing the number of women in the workforce, whether they needed it or not, or could do the job or not, it didn't matter. Those were the numbers. That was the KPIs they had to meet, and they could get in all sorts of deep shit if they didn't. So that was the thing there. So the wealth and the affluence, the luxury, the leisure time for Western women then had never been greater than it had been previously. So these people doing the agitating were, as I mentioned earlier, primarily Jewish, most of them having real inability to get on with anybody. They had real relationship problems with men. They didn't really want to get married. They didn't want children. The lesbians sort of didn't. So they clearly represented an anti-family, sort of anti-male type attitude, not only ideologically, but on a personal level. But add into that the Jewish thing, where they didn't want to lead the Jewish lifestyle. So they're sort of in between the Jewish and the Gentile sort of, they sort of wanted to move into the Gentile lifestyle sort of mainstream, but they couldn't do that because they were Jewish and they didn't really fit in. They kind of didn't fit into the Jewish thing anymore either. Particularly not the the religious rituals and things like that. They kind of balked at that. So they found themselves in between, really not in either camp, which must have caused them, a decent amount of angst just on that side alone. And then you add in the lesbianism, the Marxist activism, their inability to get on and form relationships with men. That's even for the straight ones. Betty Friedan, as an example, had this most fractious relationships with men, and she's no beauty queen, and was unable to sort of score the Gentile boyfriends that she'd fantasized about, and so that anger and bitterness sort of came out in her attitudes. Quite apart from the fact she was an editor for a communist underground agitator newspaper. So it was filled with ideological nonsense on top of the Jewishness and the kind of ambiguous sexuality she had. You'd almost say that, I suppose, she was bi, I guess, if you think about it. But anyway, these are the sort of people who were pushing it. So you've got Betty Friedan and Shulamith Firestein, and others that then I can't think of off the top of my head. Names like Levine and Eisenstein and others come to mind. Ellen Levine, I think it was. Hester Eisenstein, Kate Millett, and there was a whole Hester Eisenstein, Kate Millett, and there was a whole bunch of them around there, and they were all really in that crowd that pushed the agitation. It's surprising to me now, thinking back in the time, how they were able to find so many tame publishers and tame journalists, most of whom were, of course, in the Jewish community that felt themselves outside of the Gentile mainstream and kind of wanted to hit back at it in some way, and thought this might be a good way of doing it. Let's fuck those Gentiles up, those assholes. Let's give them some shit to think about. That type of thing. And so this was the idea that this was what they tried to push, that these women were oppressed at a time when Western women had never been richer, never been more affluent, never been more pampered, and never had more opportunities. Now, there's a couple of other things they throw in there for the mix, that women weren't allowed to go to school. That was nonsense. Women were going to school. I guess, as a kid, when sort of, and I was still at school when exams, you passed or failed. There was none of this gender here and race that. It did come later in senior high school, but not in the earlier years of school. You passed or you failed. That was it. You didn't work hard. You didn't study. You didn't do your work. Then you wouldn't. Oh, I know some kids were like pretty bright and had photographic memories. I wasn't one of them. I had to do the work. But when third year high school came along, there was a lot of kids were just told, look, you're flunking your exams, go out and get a trade, go and get a job. You're wasting your time here at school. You're a hopeless student. And so they pretty much kicked you out in those days. I mean, if you weren't passing and you weren't making the effort, some kids who sort of flunked or were, just sort of barely passing, but they were quite diligent students, they kind of hang on to them. But the others go, no, you're too stupid, you're too lazy, you don't care, go and get a job. So, and this is like 14 years, and I think it was 14 years and 6 months or something like that. You had to have that much minimum education. So off the kids went, and most of the kids that left at that stage were girls. Not all, but most of them were. Now, the girls that left, went into things like, I don't know, hairdressing and whatnot, and I don't know, working in retail and so on. The guys went in and tried to get jobs as apprentice tradespeople and those sorts of things. Some went into labouring and the like, but those were the and I think before that, probably girls were in the slight majority in school until that third year high school sort of clear out of the. Then at the end of the next year, you kind of had your graduation exam to go to senior high school, and there was another clear out of kids then. That's again, more girls were flunking exams back then, so more of them left than the boys. Now, there was an argument at the time, and things, well, girls aren't being encouraged enough. They should be helped more. They should be supported more, and this sort of thing. Well, why? Well, why should they be supported more than the boys? Oh, well, the boys are naturally more confident, harder working. Well, then that's why they're passing the exams. Like, excuse me. So then the feminist sort of thing started to come in that girls had to be soft marked. And so again, coming back to this thing of equal outcomes. So only when they changed the system to soft marking girls did the outcomes start to become equal, and which was of course the intention. Equal outcomes was always the intention. So that was the change there. But back in the day, everyone had the opportunity to pass. If you passed, you passed. I remember a girl did very well at I can't remember, it was physics or chemistry or something in senior high school. She was a bright girl, deserved to pass. Why not? There was very few of them though. Like for every 10 boys that would pass that, there would be one girl, for example. But if she passed, she passed and was due to and credit where credit's due. So this idea of equal outcomes as it came along, artificially changed the landscape there. But back in the days when you passed or failed, come sort of year 11 of high school, there would be 75% or so, 70 to 75% would be boys. And it was only the soft marking of girls that kept them in the game there. Otherwise, the girls would have probably been 10 or 15%. At that time. So, but again, this idea that that's oppression is nonsense. People who passed, people who failed. And so, and that's simply how it was. Now, in terms of the job opportunities, people who had a better education had more job opportunities. people who are bigger and fitter had more job opportunities, but that's not an example of oppression. Far from it. That's practical reality of how things were. Now, these agitators may have looked wistfully and dreamily at the Soviet system, where sort of everybody had to work and everybody had to consume, and assuming that was, or treated that as the utopia that we should all be, the Marxist utopia we should all be aspiring towards. So if you look at that and say, well, that's the utopia. And then you can say, well, we don't have it here, therefore we have the problem. Not that their system is crap, but our system must be crap because it's not the same as theirs. It doesn't get the same outcome. But that's a fool's errand and is absolute nonsense, and should be consigned, to the garbage heap for the nonsense it is. So that's just a sort of a rounded view there. Again, we come back to the agitators and the propagandists saying that the luckiest, most fortunate, richest, leisure-rich women in human history, they're trying to sell us that they were actually the most oppressed in human history. and they managed to actually get traction with that bullshit. So there you go. But that gives you a bit of a wider view on that issue. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.